Welcome to the IBMS Lothian and Borders podcast.
Is there enough bagpipe in that? Hello, my name is Mike Gray and I'd like to welcome you to the IBMS Lothian and Borders branch podcast. What's all this about, you might ask? Well, for those of you listening who don't know, the Institute of Biomedical Science, which is the professional body for biomedical scientists in the UK, has branches in all corners of the country, and in the southeast of Scotland, where Edinburgh and the Borders sit, we have a branch. So this podcast was an idea from the branch committee to look at, in the first instance, at career stories of biomedical scientists. Why career stories? There is a lot of information out there on how to get into biomedical science, and there are some podcasts that focus on scientific topics. But from a people perspective, we often get very useful talks from senior individuals in the profession. And as interesting as they are, the committee hit upon the idea of listening to all levels of staff involved in biomedical science with the aim of capturing the stories of professionals you might not necessarily hear from, and to look at all stages of the career ladder. So each story, we hope, will be inspirational. Each story will have a message, and if anything, will highlight the myriad of ways that people get into biomedical science. So if you like stories and finding out about people, then stick around. What could possibly go wrong? So my guest today is Tiffany Pietrek, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Tiffany, name, rank and serial number. What do you do and where are you currently working?
So I am a senior biomedical scientist and I'm currently working at SMBTS at the Jack Copeland Centre in donation testing.
Yes. So before we get into the science of what your job actually does, what we're going to do is we're going to go right back to the beginning. So when you were at school, when you were looking at various career options, how did you start this journey?
So that's quite an interesting question because I had no idea that I was going to be in this profession that I'm now in. When I was at high school, I was aiming to be a travel rep because I enjoyed traveling.
Like Ibiza and things like that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right,
I enjoyed partying. And then a thought crossed my mind that I couldn't be hitting nightclubs when I'm in my 30s.
Okay.
So I ended up I didn't have the grades to go to university, so I ended up going to college and was supposed to do travel and tourism at college, and at the very last minute changed my application into doing a HND in applied sciences, and got enrolled and met a few good friends that play a very pivotal part in this career journey, actually.
Right.
And from there ended up to the position that I'm in now. I would say actually through fate, almost. Like, if people believe in fate, it was certainly not a planned journey to get to this point and where I am, but a lot of key things happened that I would put down to fate.
Right,
almost.
Okay. So that was an HND at college.
Yep.
Clearly you're Scottish, even although it's Pietrek.
Yep.
And there's a bit of Polish descendancy there. What college was that you went to?
So I went to what was called Adam Smith College, which is now Fife College, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a HND in Applied Sciences and then a HNC, in Applied Sciences, and then moved on to a HND in Biological Sciences, which gave me a direct entry into third year at Abertay University into biomedical science.
Right. So how did you make that brain leap between I'm doing applied sciences or applied science, and now it needs to be biomedical science? So was there somebody you knew that worked in a lab, or?
So this is where I would say fate came in.
Oh, let's hear the fate story.
So I'd applied for a job at Sky, and it got through like God knows how many interview rounds, and at the very last round got knocked back. And at that point I was living in a house with people from my college class, so I needed to pay rent and stuff, which is why I needed a job. So got knocked back from Sky, went to the job centre. Remember the wee machines back in the day where you would type in like available jobs?
Yeah.
And a job came up for a medical lab assistant. I had no idea what this meant, but the hours sat very well around my college qualification. So the hours were 4:30 till 9, 4 days a week. And I was like, oh, well, wait a minute. I'll apply for this because I finished college at 3, I can get to Dunfermline, all the rest of it. And I had no idea. I actually thought it was a mistake in the advert for the hours they work.
Right.
But I was like, oh, I'll just go and see what happens. Had no idea what the job was, anything at all. Because at that point in time...
You knew it was in a hospital.
I knew it was in the hospital,
yeah.
But remembering when people think about hospitals, they think about doctors, nurses and porters.
Yes.
They don't think about what happens to samples when they get taken, or who analyses them, who turns out the results, or any of that. And as naive as I was at 18, it never crossed my mind to figure out how do people make clinical decisions off results from blood samples.
So when you went to the interview, how did that go? I mean, this is fascinating. Go and tell me. So you've applied.
Yep.
You've got at this stage. Have you finished your degree? Yes.
No. So I'd finished first year. Well, I finished the HNC in Applied Sciences, but I didn't know if I'd passed or not yet. I just knew that I'd finished, and I had enrolled in the HND for Biological Science. That's all I knew at that point.
So you were basically working and studying at the same time?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you went along to the interview, so you put your best clothes on.
Yep.
And you went along, and was this at Victoria Royal?
No, so this was at when Queen Margaret and the Victoria Hospital in Fife, they used to be 2 separate hospitals.
Right.
So it was to work in the Queen Margaret lab at that point. And that was kind of deemed the trauma centre out of hours before they amalgamated.
Okay.
Essentially. So turned up to the interview, and there was a blood bank senior from the Vic there.
Okay.
There was a senior from Queen Margaret Lab, and there was a lab manager from the Queen Margaret Lab.
Okay.
And I had no idea what all this really meant, if I'm being honest. They just asked me generic questions like, why do you think you're good for this role? What do you know about the role?
I don't know what the job is.
Exactly. I mean, I was very wet, like amongst the ears, whatever the saying is. Do you know, I had no idea what I was really...
You must have impressed them with your enthusiasm on some level.
I mean, I don't know who else was getting interviewed for the job, but I think what impressed them was that I was studying a science qualification.
Right, okay.
So it's shown some kind of interest in science, whereas perhaps the other interviewees were not studying or didn't have enough of a background within science. I don't know. But they did say to me, the last thing they said to me before I left was, if we offered you the job, will you still continue in studying? And I was like, yeah, of course I need to study. That's a very random question, but yeah.
Okay, so this is really good because you are somebody who didn't sit down with a career plan. You didn't understand what a medical laboratory was. You didn't have any grand aspirations whatsoever. And basically you rock up at an interview for a job that's got hours and sounds about sciencey, and it might interest you. You get the job. And then, so can you tell me, what was your first day like?
It was wild. I mean, I had no idea. Rocked up, and it was code entry to get into the lab. So I'm tapping on the door to get in.
Let me in.
100%, literally let me in. And the door gets answered by another medical lab assistant who welcomes me with open arms, and I take a look around, and it's pretty much all people that are middle-aged, and I was like, what's going on here? What is this? Where am I?
I would have thought the normal answer in Fife would be, what do you want?
It probably was.
Right.
And then I get shown to specimen reception, get shown to the haematology section, the biochemistry section, blood banking section. Met the data entry staff for the request forms before they became like a automated process. And at that point, I would say my eyes were widely open. I had no idea this whole other world existed behind one closed door that needed a keypad entry code to get in.
So how then did you, so you're working away in the lab and you've been warmly welcomed by everybody. How did you then get to the point of, right, I'm finishing my degree and I'm looking for registration? I guess did you take all that in by osmosis or?
No. So again, this is where it ends up in a very, I would say, controversial way. So originally finished the HND at Adam Smith College and applied to universities, and ended up going to Heriot-Watt University to study biology. That was what I was going to do. But at that point in time, I didn't drive, and it was 3 buses to get to Heriot-Watt University, which took an hour and a half on a best day from Fife to Heriot-Watt. And eventually enrolled in the courses, in the classes. It was good. I mean, it was interesting, but there was a distinct difference between college life and university life. And by that, I mean college life was a lot harder. You needed at least 60% on like your lab practical reports, actual lab practical work.
Right, yeah.
The lab practical work, you didn't have anything set out. You would go into the lab and it was empty benches. You had to figure out the equipment you needed, what solutions you needed to make up to do the experiments. The tutorials, you needed 60% to pass. Like everything was 60%. If you didn't get it, you were out the door. And then turning up to Heriot-Watt and getting told you just needed 40% to pass. It was a total shift in dynamic almost, because you're working quite highly under pressure at college to obtain 60% or above. And then you go to university because you're made to think university is this whole...
it's better than everybody else.
Yes, exactly that. So getting to university and getting there and then being told everything's 40%, and then you do the maths and you're like, that's not even half of what you're turning up to.
I'm sure that wouldn't stop you putting the effort in though. So at some point you passed all this, yes?
Well, that it did actually. The 40%.
Get to the controversial.
Yeah, I mean the 40% did. So at that point, travelling back and forward to Heriot-Watt, it was just ridiculous. So worked out what 40% of attendance was.
Okay.
And then got there. And then on a particular day decided, so me and my housemate at that point decided we were both at Heriot-Watt, and I remember tapping on their bedroom door and I was like, right, today's the day. I really can't be bothered sitting on a bus for an hour and a half. Do you just want to miss class and we'll watch Loose Women instead? So we decided to watch Loose Women, and the next thing, halfway through Loose Women, the phone rings, the house phone, and it's the university pretty much saying, "Don't come back because you've missed too much."
Dear.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
So that's the controversial part of it. So at that
So
point, I was like,
are you a recovering biomedical scientist then, or at that point a
well,
recovering medical laboratory assistant?
no, I mean, I was still being an MLA at Fife at that point. So I went to work later on that day and I was telling the BMSs what had happened. And they turned around and were like, Tiff, like, why are you not considering a career in biomedical science? And I was like, I've never really thought about it before, because in my head, I'm very lucky to even be like a lab assistant, never mind a biomedical scientist. And it was the staff there that actually sat me down and gave me like a real talking to. They were like, so we got kicked out December, and the next enrollment was August, September for the next university year. And they were saying, right, you've got X amount of months to get your head in the game. While you're not at university, you'll come to the lab and we'll teach you stuff that'll be relevant for your course. And that is where I would suppose the passion almost came from, actually. Do you know, having that kind of supportive network and encouraging somebody that had no idea what this profession actually was, didn't even know it existed up until that job.
So this was like you developing a mentor group at work of really supportive colleagues.
Yeah.
Who didn't want to see your talents be flushed down the Loose Women sofa route. Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, shout out to the folk in Fife. I mean, are you in contact with anybody that's left in Fife?
No, actually, because when I got my degree and I was accredited, there was no permanent full-time positions, which led me to SMBTS.
Right, so let's talk about stage 2. So you get your degree.
Yep.
And when was that, if you don't mind me asking?
It was 2010.
2010, right, so 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still an MLA in Fife at this point.
Yep.
And then you see an advert for, of course by now, you're a well-rounded professional individual and understand everything about laboratories. So you're looking at adverts.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the advert that caught your eye and why?
So all I knew at that point was I had this degree where I was on the HCPC register, and that I don't think there's not enough importance put on degrees when it comes to selecting the right degree.
Okay.
And I was very lucky that the lab staff at Fife told me I needed an accredited degree and pretty much pointed me to the universities that would have an integrated route where you did your registration portfolio whilst at university on a placement.
Okay.
And once qualified or graduated, you would become a BMS. There's no trainee aspect because I would be on the HCPC register after graduation. So with that in mind, I scoured NHS job websites and applied for any job that listed they were looking for a biomedical scientist for every discipline, essentially. And I got, the very first interview I got was for SMBTS, and it was for a Glasgow. Originally the advert was for Glasgow. So rocked up to Glasgow and went to the interview. The interview panel was massive. It was, I think, 6 or 8 people on the panel. And honestly, it was crazy.
How not to do it?
It was.
I don't think that's in the book of how to do an interview.
Well, to be fair, they had multiple vacancies across
Oh,
multiple
all right. Yeah,
departments.
yeah. Okay.
So they had vacancies within Glasgow, within uh, their manufacturing area in Glasgow and their testing lab in Glasgow. And they also had vacancies over in Edinburgh for the same. And there was a multitude of permanent, fixed term, covering maternity, all the rest of it,
But it was
which
still
is why.
selection by a football team, you know.
Oh yeah, 100%. And the interviews, I got told when I rocked up to the interview, there was like just under 200 applications. So it
Ooh.
felt quite an honour to get
Yeah.
selected, to be fair, even for an interview. So rocked up to the interview and pretty much got asked the standard questions. Where did you study your degree? Why did you get into biomedical science? We can see that you're working as a lab assistant just now. What do you like about that job? What do you not like about that job? Standard interview questions. And I suppose I really answered them honestly. It was at the time where nobody really prepared for interviews. There wasn't a lot of pressure on you should study like what the organisation is, study your answers to your questions. So it was probably a very raw interview.
If you were going to mentor somebody, well, honest, we will finish this before the clock strikes midnight, right? But I'm interested now. So, if you were going to tell somebody or give them a bit of advice about approaching that type of interview now, like an early stage interview, what would you have told them?
I mean, are we talking at this current
What
point in
lesson did you,
time?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now that you've been through it a few times, bearing in mind that what you described there was back then, you didn't really expect the candidate to know too much about the employer. You're realising, because you'll be interviewing people yourself now,
Yep.
that if somebody comes to the table and it sounds like they pay an interest to the prospective employer, that you're going to give them half a shot. You're going to go, or you're going to be at least slightly interested in them. And it shows, I suppose, that they have some form of commitment to understanding. Yes?
Yep. And I think that's it. It's now, I suppose, reflected on it, it showed through my application, probably showed commitment. I mean, I didn't drive, so I was going to study at Aberdeen, Dundee, and taking a bus from Kirkcaldy to Dundee, doing a whole day in lectures, and then getting a bus from Dundee to Dunfermline, working till 9 o'clock at night, and then getting a bus back home that would take an hour. So even though I might not have known too much about SMBTS at that point in time, I think in the application form, there was an element or an essence of commitment.
Right.
And just as you've pointed out, that does shine through in interviews. Like
Absolutely.
you do know if somebody's committed to the profession or not.
I'm gonna get, for these, I'm gonna get a little bell and I'm gonna ring it when we've got a learning point. Dingy dingy ding ding. Right, okay. So at the moment you're a basic grade biomedical scientist in SMBTS.
Yep.
And you do that for how long, roughly?
So I did that for 9 years, I think. Yeah, 9 years. But in that point in time, I definitely wavered because I came from a clinical lab, and there's a distinct difference between clinical labs and blood establishment labs.
Right, okay. Well,
And
we'll get into the science in a minute because you're going to teach me exactly what you do in a second, right? But at the moment, I'm interested in your thought process that you went through. So you're sitting there as a basic grade and you're thinking, right, did it go through your head, I need to get promotion now? Or did somebody say to you, you need to think about getting yourself promoted and do something? Or How did you arrive at that conclusion?
So, yeah, again, Mike, it's a very interesting story.
Does this involve loose women, a sofa, and no turning up to work? No.
No, so I think all my peers knew that I would be a senior way before I did,
Right, okay.
and it would be a standard throwaway comment that would get said. And I quickly realised at SMBTS there is a lot of educational opportunities given. So I settled in by pretty much thinking, right, I'll get my specialist portfolio. From there, I'll get an MSc, and then I'll leave SMBTS to get back to clinical. But I fell in love with SMBTS at that point, as much as I really didn't want to.
Oh, they're a nice bunch of folk, though.
Well, I mean, they are. I mean, during that point, I did apply for a job in Lothian, got offered and turned it down.
Oh, thank you for that. Yes.
Sorry, Alan, if you're going to listen to this, but yeah. So ended up getting the MSc, and I really didn't actually envision becoming a senior. I just did it because I knew that if I then decided to go for other jobs, it would look really good on the application. And this is where it becomes interesting. Somebody spoke to me and said, "You will never be a senior." And I went, "Okay, we'll see about that."
Yes, I will.
And lo and behold, the next opportunity that came up to become a senior, I applied for it and got offered the job. And that's how I became a senior in donor testing at SMBTS.
Right. So that is where you are now, yes?
Yep.
And you've been there for doing that role for how long?
So been doing that for what, 5 years, nearly coming up for 5 years now.
Oh, it's time to get back on that couch and start watching Loose Women and having another career think. I think if I was going to give you any advice, not that I'm anybody to give you any advice, but anyway, so you're in that job right now, and you like it, yes?
So I took a secondment.
Oh,
Which I'm just,
it gets more interesting.
So it gets
okay.
interesting, I would say. So took a secondment, I think 3 years into being 3 years into being a senior, and applied for a secondment as a project manager, but in the skies of the job title development officer. Had no idea, yet again, had no idea what was going on. Turned up, got interviewed, got offered the secondment, and then have fell into this rabbit hole of project management and delivering aspects of projects for SMBTS, one project. And now I'm kind of in that, my secondment's ended now, so I'm in this transition period of getting back into lab life from sitting at a desk for 2 years.
Okay. Without us breaking any rules here, because sometimes the stuff that happens in labs and in big organisations, you can't talk about commercial affairs, etc. We can't talk about certain reorganisations, etc., because that's daft. But roughly what was the project about? The one that you did? If it's a controversial project, then we're not going to talk about it.
I would say it's a controversial project.
Oh, okay, so we'll not talk about that then. Right, I'll get my little bleeper in a minute and cut that out. Or I might not, because it's quite funny. So on a day-to-day basis, back in your clinical role, this is where I'm going to start to ask you about the science. So on a day-to-day basis, if you had to explain it to me now, just to let you know, I'm a bacteriologist, which means what I know about blood pack making and associated body fluids and keeping the population safe with a brilliant supply of blood, which is what SMBTS do. You're going to have to explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. So have a go.
Yeah, so donors turn up at a donation centre. They get asked lots of what's the word? Very intuitive questions about their lifestyle, where they've been on holiday, all the rest of it. They
Okay.
then get bled into a pack, and with that pack comes samples. They get labelled up and sent to the National Centre, which is the Jack Copeland Centre.
Okay.
And from there, the samples and the blood get separated into different departments. So the blood packs go to our manufacturing area, and the samples come to donation testing, and that's primarily where I work. So in the manufacturing hall, they're processing the blood, they're separating it, spinning it down into the relevant components that we need, i.e. concentrated red cells, platelets, fresh frozen plasma, cryo, whatever. Upstairs, we're doing the testing for all the mandatory markers to ensure that it's safe for transfusion. We're testing for all the bloodborne viruses, so HIV, hepatitis B, C, hepatitis E, West Nile, which is a discretionary test, along with CNV. We also do ABO blood grouping as well, and we do antibody testing, and we do phenotyping to provide blood for those that have antibodies,
Right. Okay.
that have extended need, essentially. We also do a lot of quality control to ensure that the products that we are manufacturing are fit for specification as well. And we also do some bacteriology testing there on platelets.
How dare you?
So all our platelets go through bacterial testing,
Of course. Yes.
and they get monitored throughout their lifespan to make sure that no bacterial growth. And we also deal with query transfusion reactions to see if somebody who has had a reaction to a transfusion, that there's been no bacteria involved in it as well. So I kind of like to think of donor testing as a little bit of everything from a clinical lab. So we have serology, we've got virology, we've got hematology, bacteriology, just very small elements,
Well,
which makes it a bit more exciting.
It's quite a lot actually. I mean, it seemed what you're describing to me is kind of what some of our blood science laboratories do. Do you do any chemistries on the blood at all?
So not really, to be fair. We probably do pH testing, and that's about as much chemistry.
Okay. Right. Okay. So I get it now. Thank you. So you're not downstairs in the bowels where they stick it into a centrifuge, I guess, and start the process there. You get the things to test, and effectively that'll be donor serum mostly, won't it? Or plasma?
Yeah, so we have 3 different sample tubes.
Okay.
Well, collectively 4 now, because we're about to start parvo testing and B19 testing for plasma for medicines. So our 3 sample types are EDTA sample, serum sample, and a plasma preparation tube, PPT, which is slightly different
Right.
for clinical labs.
Well, I'm going to ring my little bell again for a learning point there. So I've now been educated. It's the Teach Mike section. Wow, that's really cool. I'm going to stop your career story at this point. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to change tack slightly and ask you about the Institute of Biomedical Science and your involvement there. So you are the chair of the Lothian and Borders branch of the Institute of Biomedical Science. And as I've previously described, if anybody's hung on long enough to listen to this at the beginning, is the IBMS has a branch structure before comprised of professionals that want to do effectively voluntary work for their professional body. The vast majority of those, I guess, are in NHS labs, although there is a proportion that work in the private sector. So, how did you start your thought process on getting involved at that level? You've got a successful career. We haven't done what you're going to be doing in 5 years yet, right? And you've thought to yourself, I quite fancy doing something for the IBMS or with the IBMS, with my professional body. How did that start?
So it started when I then realised there was a significant difference with clinical labs and what the IBMS offers clinical labs and what the IBMS offers blood establishment labs or processing centres.
Is there? Explain.
Yeah, so I think when I did my specialist portfolio, it's geared up to clinical blood transfusion, but there's a whole different realm of blood transfusion and blood establishments. We focused highly on the quality management system and making sure the blood we are providing for service users is safe and that it is available and we were meeting all the transfusion needs of the population of Scotland. And that probably didn't really come through in the specialist portfolio. Like it ticked all the big subject sections for blood transfusion. And it was at that point I kind of realised, there is a big difference here. And speaking to a lot of people that I know in clinical labs, their perception of what happens in blood establishment labs is maybe not to the full, maybe not understanding the different aspects of it. So that's when I categorically decided, well, do you know what? We'll see what's happening in the local branch, and from there, I'll just start beating a drum about SMBTS.
Absolutely. And I've been along to the branch meeting and you're an excellent chair. You have a very calm and organised demeanour, which can shut the likes of me up, which is really useful in a committee setting. So well done.
Thank you.
Well done on doing that. You're really good at it.
Thank you.
Slightly shifting, same theme. Where do you think the IBMS is going? What do you think it needs to do?
Well, I think different people will have different points of view on this depending on where they are in the country. So from my point of view, just to be clear on that, I do think we should be focusing a lot more on what happens in Scotland. I think we should be, it's a very interesting question. I think, I like what the IBMS is doing or has been doing of late with the Biomedical Science Day. I mean, whoever came up with that idea was a genius, an absolute genius. The amount of staff that get involved in that and the competition between the different labs is great. It's good fun. And not only that, but showcasing what actually happens in labs and almost being more engaged in trying to speak to members before you would get sent your magazine in the post. Yeah. And there perhaps wasn't that same engagement as what there is now with the likes of X, when you can tweet David Wells with whatever crazy suggestion you've got to help improve the Institute. I like that they're more open to listening to ideas and perhaps what they were before. I mean, what it was originally, the climate is changing. There's different generations now coming into the profession. It needs handled in a different way. And I think as a society, categorically across, we're quite used to saying it's always been done like this. And that's just not feasible in this day and age now. We should be aiming to get the best for the profession, get the best out of networking opportunities or meeting new people. I mean, Mike, we've never met until what, as of 2 months ago, if that, do you know?
Exactly. But then that's, I agree. I mean, I think the IBMS has come on, especially in the last 5-6 years, into its own. It's embraced the digital age, I think. I haven't been involved as much as I perhaps should have been, and I've been doing this for a long time. But I do get the sense now that the spirit of community and the connections that you can make through that system is worth it. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this particular podcast, is if we can capture some stories of real biomedical scientists. I'm not saying that the rest of you out there are fake. That's not what I'm saying. But people that you perhaps wouldn't normally find in a podcast. Because I guess it's great to talk and listen and hear about lots of science from lots of eminent scientists and to hear about great swathes of strategy. But when it comes down to it, there are people that need to work in labs and there are people that need to be interested in helping the population, aren't there?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's a job that is, you're not essentially, how can I explain it? You're involved in patient care, but you are behind the scenes of it. So it's not predominantly at the forefront of your working day. It's not till you take a minute, take a step out, and you actually think, oh, wait a minute, I've done this work today. How many people has that impacted?
Well,
it is
in the case of SMBTS, hundreds upon thousands upon hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, and I think internally within SMBTS, we perhaps, within the labs anyway, we know we are making these products and stuff, but we're perhaps not too aware how much of an impact, I suppose, we really are. And I think it takes people a minute to sit down and really think about it. And I suppose that's just where, like, the Institute with Biomedical Science Day, where you've got your placards that say, how many samples have you tested this year? Or, do you know, it's those moments that make you think, actually, we are making a difference. Like the pandemic, when it was the clapping at 8:00, do you know, we were all still going to work, not thinking on anything other than we need to go to work because people need blood or they need samples tested for clinical outcomes. That we never did it because we wanted to get acknowledgement. We did it because we're in a profession that doesn't stop. It's continuous, regardless of what's going on in the world. You know, war, pandemics, it's your grand's birthday, like, do you know?
I think it's fair to say we definitely are the silent, sometimes background crew, backroom crew even. You make some excellent points. Okay, I'm going to give you one last question and then you're free to go. So, in 5 years' time, this is a classic interview question. Where do you see yourself?
Honestly, I mean, reflecting back on my career, I've never been career aspirationally driven. I've always found myself in situations which have been extremely fortunate. So I know I'll still be at SMBTS, I know that much.
Okay, good.
Just don't know if I'll still be a senior in donor testing. I think SMBTS, what I love about it is it's always changing. It's always striving to improve change, and with that comes new opportunities and new job roles. So who knows, to be honest. I know that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer rather than like, oh, I see myself as like lab manager or whatever. But
No, it's honest. It's honest. I think you will have a further loose women event where you sitting on the sofa and the phone goes, and somebody will be offering you another job at some point. I'm pretty sure of it. Okay, so we're coming up to 45 minutes, and it's just flown by.
certainly has.
I'd like to say thanks very much to Tiffany for joining us. And we hope you've enjoyed listening to our ramble through somebody's real life. And I think that's about it. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.